We'll deal with issue number 3, 4, and 5 as identified by the court. There was a difference between Forms 34A uploaded on the IBC and the Forms 34A received at the National Tallying Center and Forms 34A issued to the agents at the polling stations. I will start with that issue. My ladies and my lords, the evidence that we supply for that issue is contained. First of all, the complaint is at paragraphs 81 to 91 of the petition, and the evidence is contained in the affidavits of Celestine Anyango, Arnold Ochieng Oginga, Benjamin Agina, and Benson Wesonga. My lady, in Celestine Anyango's affidavit, the complaint is made that in 41 forms from the polling stations that she looked at, the Forms 34A received by the petitioner's agents vis-a-vis the Forms 34A uploaded in the IBC portal and those brought to the tallying center are different. The sampled forms were from Bomet, Kiambu, and Kakamega counties. The evidence is at page 18 to 106 of the affidavit of Celestine Anyango. My ladies and my lords, this evidence should be considered together with the evidence in the affidavit of Benjamin Agina, sworn for the petitioner, paragraph 9. Which deals with the Forms 34A that the IEBC had stated it would procure, and the features in those forms that should have been used in the election. It is our contention that what the IEBC set out to procure is not what they procured in the first instance. Therefore, we cannot even match the forms that we have and that have been provided in the election to what they had set out to procure. We have stated in paragraph 110 of the petition, from paragraphs 108 to 110, that the IEBC procured 2 parallel sets of Forms 34A, marked booklets 1 of 2 and 2 of 2. It was intended that only booklet 1 of 2 would be used at the polling station, while booklet 2 of 2 was to be placed in a tamper-proof envelope and not to be used at the polling station. The forms that have been transmitted, of the forms that were used to transmit the results in this election 2022, do not meet the standards or conform to either of the forms that the IBC said were going to be used, and this evidence is in the affidavit of Benjamin Agena. That is the first limb of the evidence that we submit through Celestine Anyango that shows the deliberate mischief in the use of the statutory forms that was set out in the election and which we now complain of. Going now to the evidence provided by Celestine Anyango in the 41 forms, what was observed is that the forms that the agents have and the forms in the portal are the same in all features. They have the same serial numbers. They are embossed using the same stamps. They're signed by the same agent, presiding and deputy presiding officers. However, the figures in the forms have been tampered with and are different with regards to the results for the first petitioner and the results of the first respondent, William Samoei Ruto. It is in the forms, or the sample of forms, the 41 sample of forms exhibited by Celestine Anyango, that votes have been reduced from the first petitioner and added to the first respondent. We have calculated the total number of votes reduced from the first petitioner and added to the first respondent, and they add up to 2,793 votes. My ladies and my lords, we contend that the figures are important because of the slim margin with which the first respondent won the election or was declared as the winner in the election. And the court, we asked the court to keep a note on that. My ladies and my lords, the difference between the result declared to overcome the 50% plus one threshold is 69,000 votes. 0.49%, which is the margin that the first respondent is said to have overcome the constitutional threshold, is the equivalent of 69,000 votes. And therefore, when we look at the results and the numbers that we will show have been tampered with, either reduced or removed from the first petitioner's votes, we will show that those discrepancies affect the outcome of the election or the result of the election. we have already shown that there is 2,793 votes removed from the first petitioner and added to the first respondent. There is also from Kakamega County the example where votes would be deducted from the first petitioner but not added to any particular candidate. The mischief that is also borne out in our affidavits is that the intention was to ensure that the total number of voters remained exactly the same. So, for example, just a minute. I beg your pardon. At page 2 of the affidavit of Celestine Anyango's affidavit, at paragraph 4, my lady, just as an example, in Chepalungu, polling station 1 of 1, the first petitioners and the physical copy of the Form 34A that was given to the agent, the first petitioner had 61 votes. In the form that was uploaded, or that is appearing in the IBC portal, the first petitioner has 1 vote. In the Form 34A of the same polling station, the first respondent, William Ruto, had 109 votes. In the Form 34A in the IBC portal, William Ruto has 169 votes. The 60 votes that are reduced from the first petitioner are added to William Ruto. The total votes remain the same. The same continues in all the 41 polling stations that we have sampled and annexed to the affidavit. Similar to that issue is the evidence sworn by, in the affidavit sworn by Arnold Oginga at page 4 to 13, where he highlights discrepancies in the Forms 34A issued to the petitioner's agents and the ones uploaded by the first respondent, the IBC, in the public portal. Arnold Oginga sampled polling stations, 25 polling stations in Baringo, 15 polling stations in Nairobi, and he finds the same results as Celestine Onyango, where a total of 1,570 votes are added to the votes of the first respondent, William Samoei Ruto, that are not borne out by the original Forms 34A issued to the agents. From the affidavits or the evidence of Celestine Anyango and Arnold Oginga, we conclude or find that the total number of votes deducted from the first petitioner and added to the first respondent is 4,463 votes. The second issue that I will deal with, my lady, is issue number 4, which is whether the postponement of the gubernatorial elections in Kakamega and Mombasa counties, parliamentary elections in Kitui Rural, Kachaliba, Rongai, and Pokot South constituencies, and the electoral wards in Nyaki West in North Imenti constituency and Kwanjenga in Embakasi South constituency resulted in voter suppression to the detriment of the petitioners in petition number E005 of 2022. The evidence that we rely upon for this is also in the affidavit of Celestina Nyango, Arnold Oginga, and the affidavit of Ezra Sunguti, who was an agent of the petitioners in petition number E005 of 2022. My ladies and my lords, the first complaint and the issue in this matter is that the elections, first of all, were cancelled only in the strongholds of the first petitioner. That is the consistent theme with all the counties or constituencies where the elections were cancelled. Therefore, as the election started, the first petitioner did not start equally with the first respondent. Ezra Sunguti deposed in his affidavit that polling stations did not open at the stations where he was manning as late as 1 p.m. due to failure of KIEMS kits. One of the questions that we want to ask, because consistently the KIEMS kits appeared to have failed in the same region, in the strongholds of the first petitioner. It cannot be coincidental that only faulty KIEMS kits were sent to the petitioner's strongholds. Ezra Sunguti also testifies in his affidavit that polling started at 2 p.m. and was not extended beyond 6 p.m. despite starting 6 hours later than when the polls were supposed to open. The effects of this: one, the time was not compensated. Two, by the time polling was starting, voters had left. The disabled, the elderly, and therefore the turnout in those polling stations was affected. This particular evidence has not been controverted by the respondents. On that ground, again, we submit that the cancellation of the vote in those particular areas suppressed the voter turnout, and this can be seen by looking at the voter turnout in those constituencies as compared to the voter turnout in neighboring counties or neighboring constituencies. We find that there is a vote differential of about 4% or 5% when you compare the turnout in the areas where the election was cancelled and areas where the election was not cancelled. My ladies and my lords, we also consider that the cancellation of the votes of the election in the strongholds of the first petitioner was deliberate because the reasons given by the IBC or the chairperson are not borne out by the statutory provisions for cancellation of the election. We have also sought to corroborate this evidence with the evidence provided by Irene Masit, who is a commissioner, who testifies at paragraph 26 of her affidavit that the reason why the votes or the election was cancelled in those areas was because the commission procured the wrong ballot papers. This is a mistake that Irene Masit, a commissioner...
May I, with your very kind permission, Chief Justice, draw the attention of the court that there may be on record more than one affidavit by Ms. Masit, to the extent that the affidavit that my learned colleague refers to is an affidavit filed by the petitioner. We have no objection. However, to the extent that that is an affidavit filed in the documents by Issa Mansour, whose documents our understanding of yesterday's ruling were struck out by the court alongside his notice of appearance, then there ought not to be a reference to that affidavit.
Yes, I think counsel clarified the affidavit she's referring to.
I will clarify to that. Sorry. My lady, I hope the time will be restored to me. My learned senior.
There is an error that was stated by my colleague, Professor Gedu Muigai. The ruling by this honorable court struck out the notice of appointment of Advocate Baisa, not anything else. That is what I heard with my own ears.
If I may please interrupt you yet
Counsel,
again.
please, without wasting a lot of time, we are capable of discerning what we meant with our own ruling, let her identify the affidavit she is referring to, and when you are responding, then you deal with the issues that you are raising.
We appreciate that, my Lady Chief Justice. But I think if we proceed beyond this point without a common understanding by all the advocates as to what was the consequence of striking out the notice of appearance, then many on this side may make reference to those documents filed by Issa Mansour. To my own understanding of the law, once the notice of appointment was struck out, all consequential filings based on that were null and void and expunged from the record.
Proceed.
My ladies and my lords, that issue can be put to rest very simply. The affidavit that I refer to by Irene Massit is drawn and filed by MS Ouma J and Associates Advocates. I believe each of the commissioners had a right and did appoint their own advocates in response to the petition. And that is what I am referring to. So Malanid Senior is lost on that one. If I may proceed now. My lady, I do refer to the affidavit now of Irene Massit at paragraph 26 of her affidavit, where she deposed that the chairperson and the commission secretary and the CEO failed to ensure that due diligence was done on procurement, proofreading, and printing of ballot papers, which is also a process that takes place prior to the general elections, and which in turn affected the elections in the areas that we complain the election was cancelled. She lists it, and for time, I will not refer to them. The averment is that the error on which the IBC relies upon, or the chairperson relies upon, that led to the cancellation of the result, was one of willful neglect. Irene Massit further testifies that there was no meeting as was required to be before the procurement was done, or verification to ensure that they proofread what they had procured. And she also testifies that in practice in 2017, this had been done before to ensure that this mistake does not occur. My ladies and my lords, to the extent that that admission is made by a commissioner, we submit that we are supported or find corroboration to our complaint that the cancellation of the vote in the areas in which we have complained about was deliberate and not accidental. The fifth issue that I deal with was whether there were unexplainable discrepancies between the votes cast for the presidential candidates and other elective positions. This evidence is found in the affidavits of Celestine Anyango, I beg your pardon. My ladies and my lords, the evidence is found in the affidavit of Celestine Anyango, where she shows at paragraph 8, 9, 10, and 11, where she has produced evidence showing that in 8 counties, there was a discrepancy between the votes cast for the president, votes cast for the governor, votes cast for the senator, and votes cast for the woman representative. The total number of the votes discrepancy is 33,208. And my lady, it is at this point that I reiterate again the slim margin between the result declared for the first respondent, which is 69,000 votes, to attain the 50% plus one threshold. In response to the discrepancy of the votes that we have highlighted, the IBC's witnesses, Sunkuli, Moses Ledama Sunkuli, I believe, states that those discrepancies are accounted for by prison votes. Because prisoners only vote for the presidential candidate. My lady and my lord, if one looks at the total number of votes that have been provided as having been accounted to the prisoners, it is only 715 votes. You will find this at paragraph 53 of Sunkuli's affidavit. There is therefore no account for 32,493 votes. On that issue alone, we would like the court to consider, for instance, in Kirinyaga County, where the discrepancy between the presidential votes and the governor's votes was 23,550, which the only answer given by the respondents is that these were stray ballots. My ladies and my lords, a rough calculation of what is given as stray ballot for Kirinyaga County alone yields 33 stray ballots per polling station on average in Kirinyaga County, which we submit is not possible. This is also the kind of issue or discrepancy that, based on the rules, ought to have been brought to the attention of the National Tallying Center or the National Returning Officer. We rely also upon the authority cited in our submissions of William Kabogo, where the learned Justice Kimaru said a difference of over 5,000 votes between the parliamentary position and the presidential can only be as a result of fraud. My ladies and my lords, would also urge the court to note that at this election, the IEBC had provided a clerk whose sole duty at the polling station was to ensure that voters placed their ballot papers in the right box. And therefore, the incidence of such a high number of stray or allegedly stray ballot papers cannot be explained and has not been explained. Finally, my ladies and my lords, as time is not on my side, we urge the court to look at the evidence of Arnold Ochieng Oginga on the discrepancies between the Forms 34A, or the results declared in Forms 34A, Forms 34B, and Forms 34C. The design of the election was that this was to be a seamless transaction, and therefore the Forms 34A and the results therein ought to be the same as the Forms 34B and ought to be the same as the Forms 34C. In his affidavit, Arnold Ochieng Oginga finds that there is a discrepancy in the results to the extent of over 180,000 votes. That affects the result of the election or the outcome of the election. I will stop at this particular point and invite my senior, Mr. Paul Mwangi, to continue.
Madam Chief Justice, Madam Deputy Chief Justice, my lords, my ladies, I am to address myself to the sixth issue of the court, whether the IBC carried on the verification, tallying and declaration of results in accordance with Article 138(3)(c) and Article 138(10) of the Constitution.